All right, so next up, so this session is going to be a really cool one. We have folks from B&H, we have folks from LinkedIn as well, even though LinkedIn just walked off. This session is called New Looks for Corporate Creatives.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming. I think the topic of discussion in this panel is really an example of how this community has grown. We're not talking about the old corporate videos. This is now very high-end. I think the diversity of platforms, the level of equipment that's being used, the crowd that's so diverse here, and the list of vendors we have outside, I think that's really an example, a testament to how this community has grown and how complex and diverse, the creation of content has been in the corporate world. So today, we're going to explore a little bit how the creative direction of certain companies and how this is being approached to reach the audience. And I think the audience is also diverse. I think the diversity of platforms, I think the amount of content that's being consumed in various form, I think probably influences how this community has grown in the way they create its content. So I think with us today we have a great panel to discuss these topics. We have Nicole Atkinson-Roach, Director at LinkedIn Media Production. Popular, as we can see. Alex Lowe from Meta, Global Executive Producer. There you go. Popular as well, popular panel we have. David Polk, Executive Producer at Intel. And Michael Sternoff, who is Creative Director at Amazon. Okay, so I think before we start, I want to ask you to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us exactly what your role is within your organization, so we understand how you can influence the level of creativity and content direction that your companies have imparted into reaching your audiences. So Nicole, let's start with you.
Sure. Nicole Atkinson-Roach. I lead an internal production team at LinkedIn, and we do video and live content for our customers, members, and employees. The majority of our work is external facing, so we probably churn out at least 500 to 600 pieces of content a year, and we're based in Sunnyvale, but have a small global reach in Dublin, Ireland, and APAC.
Alex?
Hello. So we have a number of different production arms at Meta. Most of them are built around scale. I work on a specific team called Executive Productions, where we're doing a number of different types of production for senior leaders. So we'll do everything from live events, video production, podcasts, photo shoots, the entire gamut. So our strategy is more built around versatility, agility, that kind of thing. We are primarily based in Menlo Park, but we have executives all over the world, so we're a pretty global team.
David?
Yeah, similar to Nicole and Alex, I'm part of a team at Intel called Executive Productions. Basically, my job is to design experiences surrounding our major moments for our CEO and senior executive leaders, product launches, keynotes, definitely a lot of live moments, but also surrounding those moments with relevant content and just developing content for our major initiatives and product solutions.
Michael?
Yeah, I am the creative director for Project Hyper. It is our satellite internet startup, and so it's end-to-end creative, everything from stickers, mission patches, to videos, simulations, and even rocket launches. And my favorite thing is the short documentaries to telling our customer stories, which is really why I'm here.
All right. So first question is really about the motivation, in your opinion, what has changed into how you need to create content for your organizations to reach your audiences from the past? I think the level of complexity and sophistication in the content you create, it really rivals media and entertainment or broadcast or any live production. I think at certain level, what you're creating is also sort of market leading into how to create content to reach audiences. So how are you approaching what motivates the outreach to your audiences, whether it is for sales, training, any kind of sort of medium that you need to approach? How do you see that transformation taking place?
As an internal production team, more like an agency, I think what our function is to be able to tell our company's story, whether it's internally to employees or to customers and members outside of the organization. And, media is prevalent, and goalposts have changed in terms of how media is consumed and created. Specifically, social media has kind of changed the game. And so now what we're up against in terms of creating compelling stories and telling our brand stories is around having audiences that are a bit more media savvy, have a ton of content at their fingertips. They're creating the content themselves. And so it's really about how do we meet the moment and actually create content that they themselves will stop and watch. So I think I've been doing this type of work since, I think, right around the time YouTube started, and I've watched the evolution of this industry. And I think what's happening now is there is no difference between an internal production team and an external production team. We're all trying to do the same thing, which is make sure our story is told and done so creatively.
Alex, how do you approach content creation in your organization?
Yeah, so to touch on a couple of things there, I think that there are certainly far more platforms for us to distribute content, and so we have to understand the ecosystem of each and how they differ. But the other is, as Nicole mentioned, you have a much more sophisticated audience. And so to understand their expectations for each platform really allows you to tell your brand story in a way that's authentic for that outlet, but also to subvert it. So for us on executive production, where you might have expectations of what something, a video that we put out for Mark might be, to subvert it and say, well, you might think very, very wealthy CEO, everything should be very polished, but to subvert that and say, no, we're going to do everything with an iPhone and make it feel, less produced is a term that we use a lot.
David?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I come from a sports broadcasting background, worked at NBC Sports for over 10 years, and about 6 years ago I made a shift into this corporate space, and I always thought it was kind of interesting that at the time our team was sort of looked at as sort of like an AV facilitator, not so much, there wasn't necessarily an expectation to be, understand our products and solutions, how to convert sort of a message for somebody that video production, content creation, and development is not necessarily their day job, but we're sort of subordinate to their, so I think there's an expectation because of, I think, driven by modern audience expectations that there's an opportunity there for us to be that converter between message and experience for the audience, and I think that's sort of how I see my role, so we can essentially represent the audience to our stakeholders when I think our stakeholders just represent their message and don't necessarily, we provide a vessel to create an audience, to represent the audience when we're in that content development phase. And I think that's what's the most fulfilling part of the job, is to actually understand the products and solutions, not just point and click a camera. Michael?
Yeah, for the changing platforms and everything, it comes down to kind of the attention economy. You know, everything's looking for your attention. The slot machine in your pocket's always lighting up. It's TikTok, it's everything. And, you know, we're no different that we're competing for that time. When I was at the video game Halo, we'd always talk about that our main competition wasn't necessarily Call of Duty or Fortnite. It was Netflix, it was TikTok. It's really anything that takes somebody's attention. And our content really has to compete, you know, with Slack, email, and everything else. How you present it, my dad used to always say, you know, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. I was probably wearing cargo shorts and like a Blink-182 t-shirt, but it was just like, if you present yourself as too sloppy, it's an indicator of how you take the rest of your business. And ultimately, you know, for us, we are here to land that business message. And so what I always try to do is you start to figure out what the business message is, and then you be like, what platform should I go to? You know, what's the best platform or device for this message? And you shouldn't be on a platform just because it's checking a box or chasing, you know, a trend.
So that brings me to the process. You know, how do you approach your creative process internally? You know, everyone's familiar with the traditional pipelines of production, you know, acquisition and editing and then delivery. How do you approach that internally? Are you following the same principles that we would see in any content creation process, or do you have to model it differently depending on what the message is and what the audience is, the platform? How do you segment, you know, your creative teams, assemble them, division of tasks and responsibilities? You know, how does that work in your world?
That's a big question. Okay, I'll actually start with prioritization. I think content is kind of king. It's the number one goal. You want to make sure that whatever you create, people actually stop and watch it. And if it's on a social platform, they're, you know, reacting to it, sharing to it. And one of the things Alex talked about is this idea of less produced. We've entered a world in which now we have a ton of tools post-pandemic, and with social media where people are walking around with cameras in their pockets and they think they're filmmakers. And so there's a ton of content out there, and audiences now will spend time watching crappy footage on TikTok, but what keeps them watching is the fact that it's interesting. So I think now part of the production process is not, oh, we're going to do this high-end production all the time. We now have to adapt to the audience, you know, kind of the nuance of the audience, where they're watching it, and what will resonate with them. So it could be something beautifully produced, but it could very well be iPhone video that's shot in portrait mode. So it's really, you have to be more adaptable. The good news is we have more tools, so you don't have to spend a lot of money to tell a compelling story, but it does keep you on your feet trying to figure out what to work with, and sometimes you're mixing high quality with low quality, which is a cringy moment, but you have to make it work.
Yeah, and so I'm a former director of photography for television. So while I would like to say that everything should be the best looking thing that we can possibly produce, there are actually two other factors that are more important. And as Michael touched on, the first is your message. So in a narrative sense, that might be the story you're trying to tell. I think in a corporate sense, it's the product you're trying to launch, the message you're trying to send. So every creative choice you make should be in support of that. Whether it's how you produce it, the platform you're putting it on, who you're using to deliver the message, all of those things should support, you know, that overall framework. And then the second, especially for our team, is logistics. Sometimes, while we'd like, again, to use the highest end equipment, it really just comes down to what is the fastest and the easiest for the executive that we're working with. And so that ends up really dictating how we go about producing what we're making.
So essentially, these are the same constraints that you would have in traditional production: is message, production, budget, logistics, and delivery method, right?
Yeah, for the most part, I think that you know, it's tried and true and still holds.
So crappy video, you know, on TikTok could be a design decision, right?
Totally. I think that even if you are doing something that, again, is less produced, there should be an intentionality behind why you're doing it that way.
David, how do you shape your team, generally speaking, in a typical sort of, if there is any such thing as a typical production for the content?
There's nothing typical.
There's nothing typical.
There's endless nuance to everything, and I'm sure every single production has its own challenges and audience expectations. And I think just at a high level, what Nicole said earlier is just meeting the moment. And I think, in terms of how our team works, like it's what I just try to stress to the other producers on the team: have a vision, have a point of view, but back it up with credible knowledge of the subject matter and credible knowledge of the audience, and then have a vision. And then in terms of like the process, I think in corporate production, it's all about trust. There's endless stakeholders. There's a lot of people wanting to put the fingerprints on what you're doing. You need to be prepared, credible, and gain that trust. And then the second time around, third time around, you get a little bit more autonomy to do great work. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the thumbprint changes. The best way to structure around that is with a clear rules and responsibilities, a RACI chart, to know like who's going to weigh in, how are they going to weigh in, because a lot of creative comes down to just taste. To double tap on something that Alex mentioned, I also came like as a video journalist for like news for years, and I was so obsessed with like that they're going to care so much about the quality of my photography and still and video images. And I had to have a realization. Sometimes people just don't care. They care more about the story. And so how within corporate storytelling that like you focus the story is having super clear brand guidelines so you really understand your brand. It's written, if it's internal, external, everybody's on the same page. Having a really tight creative brief for the kicking off the project. And you don't have to go crazy. It could just be a few things of like, this is our goal for the project. And then finally, writing out just a handful of tenets to be like, this is how we're going to evaluate this project, and this is the goal. Because a lot of times they try to jam a 10-minute video into a 4-minute video, and it's too much information. And so when you have the tenets, like the goal of this video is just that, but we could hit those other goals with a press release or an infographic. That allows you to kind of free up your storytelling to focus it.
So storytelling, is key in all your endeavors. But do you model your visual language, to what your audience is exposed to, generally speaking, or you try to model the visual language to the message of what you actually need to convey?
I think it's a mixture, a balance of both. I mean, I think, I think it's doing everything with purpose, but also like being a storytelling is the heart of what we do. I mean, like, content is king, but how that content is consumed makes all the difference. So like, I think about like what Michael, you're saying in terms of like, my concern is always that the content that we're producing is going to sound like, for lack of a better term, like press releasey. Like, there's a million ways to get up on stage or get in front of a camera and tell people that, hey, we're 30% faster than the last, year over year, or we're 20%, we can do a comp demo, or just a million sort of expected, approaches. But I think I'm interested to hear, like, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that mean to the customer? What does that mean to our partners? How is this actually going to make the world better? How is, what's the end result of being 20% faster? Like, I think those are like the storytelling. That's the challenge. The ability to go into a room with our stakeholders and challenge those stakeholders to tell a story that'll just with more resonance, elevated resonance with your audience, and that's it.
Does that mean that you wanted to add something?
No, I firmly believe that content, which is almost synonymous with the audience, is what matters most. And I'll just use an example. I'm not on TikTok, but I have a 22-year-old daughter who's my human AI that sends me TikTok videos, multiple ones every day, and she sends me stuff that I will watch. And I've watched a 2-minute story and been moved by someone just sitting outside in their yard, with their child crying, saying something. And at the same time, I've also watched, American Symphony on Netflix and been mesmerized by the beauty of how it's filmed. But after a while, I forget about the beauty and I'm still caught in the story. That's what keeps me watching for 2 hours. So I do believe that what you're trying to communicate and the audience you're trying to communicate to now takes precedence over the technology that you're choosing to use. It almost informs the way you need to do it, because the audience now, even the younger folk like my daughter who are entering the workforce, they're about authenticity. They want real stories. They don't want contrived stories. They want real stories. And I think as a whole, as a society, we're now used to seeing real people telling real stories. So I do think ultimately that's what's guiding, that's the direction we need to head in, is to figure out how can we really craft content that is meaningful to our audience.
Yeah. You brought a good point about the use of technology. I think you clearly make sure that the content that you create is really in the form that it needs to be, as opposed to using the technology to create the content. Is it the same for all of you, that really the creative message, is what drives the use of technology, whether it's going to be high-end, whether it's going to be on an iPhone, whether it's going to be in a multi-camera live production? You decide based on the message, the objective, and the audience expectations as to what the message is going to be. And in that regard, what kind of tools do you have at your disposal, based on budget and allocation, that do you feel like you have the freedom to express the message the way you want to express it, regardless of what the technology you need to use for it?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think that all of the creative choices that you make should support that message, and then to back that up, the technology choices that you make to make that creative real also needs to support that. So, we don't necessarily need to look at technology, whether it's cameras, the fiber systems that we're using, to say new is new, and that means it's better. Resolution being one classic example where, we go from HD to 2K to 4K to 8K, and does that necessarily make our story better? I think there's probably use cases where it's like the opposite, where you have direct-to-camera talent up on a screen, and they don't want people to see their pores in 8K, right? But I think it's also interesting for us at Meta, where there are a lot of emerging technologies that we're developing. The metaverse being one example, where as we look at that as a new venue to tell stories, it has to bring something that is unique to that space. So, overall, as we look at how we use technology, again, it has to support the story you're trying to tell, and the metaverse being one of those. Yeah,
it made me think for Meta. At a different company, I did trailer for a video game called Moss, which is on Oculus. And so the platform was YouTube, but it's a virtual reality game. And a lot of our discussions is how do we kind of visually represent virtual reality on YouTube? And really what we boil it down to was story, that if you care about the main character Quill and the story, that it looked amazing, we would communicate that it's a virtual reality game, but you have to experience it in that medium to get like that full weight. I think that's the journey that we are all on. Is a lot of times our products are technology products that it's hard to communicate how they impact in life. Like Intel Inside, like what is 20% faster? What is satellite internet? How is that going to improve your life? And so figuring out smart ways to visually represent, whether it's the human experience or if it's, graphic and simulations over, that's always like the margins that we get to play on to visually represent how our products can make our customers' lives better.
That brings me to another question. It's the resources you have at your disposal in your facilities and your organizations. Do you feel like you, more often than not, still need to go outside to vendors to create, produce, finalize the content, or do you feel like you always have the necessary technical resources internally to actually complete the task in hand for the projects that you're in charge of? And the second question on that is new trends in technology, does that influence some of the way that you create your messaging for the audience? So resources.
For vendors or to go internal, I think a lot of times for the internal, I love a generalist because when we work at tech companies, we have to do a lot of things like documentation and a lot of other things that expand the job. When I'm looking to go externally, it's really with a specialist. I always like to think like, I love Din Tai Fung. I try to make, the garlic string beans at home. It never tastes good because they have the specialized tools, they have the expertise, and they have the ingredients. And so if I'm doing something more specialized in Unreal or 3D graphics, I go external. But if it's volume and kind of easier stuff, it's better to have an internal team that's closer to it. And that always stretches one way or the other. It's very flexible. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I would just say from my perspective, I think of I think we should always be approaching our creative development and direction with an inside-out mentality, meaning like it should start with us, like internal folks, because no one should know our business and our message better than us. You can't throw a project overboard to an external agency and expect them to understand the nuance of your products and solutions and your audience and your objectives. I mean, that starts with us. So I think, obviously it depends in terms of what resources are needed, depends on the budget, the scale of the project. But I think it's just targeted resource augmentation. So if you need editors, post-production, motion graphics, things like that, but it starts with a vision of what that end product is, and then you bring in the people that are going to help you achieve that vision, as opposed to just sending a brief over the fence to an agency and say, hey, deliver me something that looks good. So I think that's part of this transformation in terms of like being AV facilitators to, credible storytellers. I think it starts with that inside-out mentality.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I totally agree with David and Michael, and I think that at Meta we're in a pretty unique position where we're trying to take a lot of productions in-house, and so for my specific team, we've built it out with people who come from a very diverse set of backgrounds. So we have people from theater, AV, corporate AV, live broadcast. I come from a film and television background. Mm-hmm. And so we have all of these sort of unicorns who have their core pieces of knowledge, but have expanded to understand everybody else's. And so as a group, we're able to produce a vast variety of things. And so that allows us to have that flexibility internally. And the other thing too that building out internally has given us is the ability to work on cutting edge projects with a lot of discretion, where you just couldn't do that with an external agency as easily. You're then requiring everybody to sign NDAs and do that whole thing. But I think we've seen a lot of positive returns from trying to marshal resources internally.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and agree with everybody here. Clearly, internal production entities understand the business, understand the brand, understand the nuances, and can be more cost efficient and faster to market. There are times where there are resource constraints. So I think our team has begun to leverage trusted vendors that we know can take on work that we have done first right of refusal on. So we're kind of positioning ourselves until we have more resources. We have a second tier. But I also loved what you talked about, Alex, about bringing together people from different disciplines in production to kind of help elevate the work. So on our team, we also have people that are independent filmmakers, that are from marketing, broadcast, documentary, you name it. And I think having this collection of people helps to inform the work and kind of help push the envelope so that you can create content where maybe globally in your organization they're less likely to want to use an agency and come directly to you.
We only have about 4 seconds left, and I have 20 more questions, so we can certainly take this outside. I think it's a mandate in the conference that everyone who is on stage is able to answer questions afterwards. So thank you very much for listening to us. Give this panel a round of applause.